waves gently rolling on a North Carolina beach at dusk, the air warm and heavy with the hum of cicadas. You're listening to this. The year is 2023. You are listening to an audio postcard from a place that no longer exists. Just inland from here, tucked away in the woods near the shoreline, there once stood a town named Roanoke, founded by the English in 1587. It was the first attempt at an English colony in North America, a fledgling settlement that was meant to serve as a counterbalance to the growing Spanish Empire. But when the supply ships arrived 3 years later in 1590, they found the town deserted, its inhabitants vanished without a trace. There have been hundreds of theories proposed over the centuries as to what happened to the so-called lost colony. Abduction by hostile Native Americans, disease, assimilation into local tribes. Even modern-day psychics have weighed in on the mystery. But the truth is, all we know for sure is that 115 English men, women and children simply disappeared, leaving behind them a mystery that has endured for more than 400 years. Hello and welcome to this special mini-series called Audio Postcards from a Vanished Past. Over the next 5 episodes we're going to be exploring some of the most intriguing mysteries of history, stories of people who lived, loved and died long ago, whose lives and legacies have been lost to the sands of time. Now, before we begin our journey into the past, I wanted to set the stage a bit and let you know what to expect from this series, and also ask you to please do me a small favor. I think you're gonna really enjoy this series because each episode is like a little vacation, a chance to wander through time and experience history from the inside out. We'll use primary source documents like journals and letters to bring to life the sights, sounds and smells of a long-gone era. And in each episode, I'll share historical tidbits and lore about the places we're visiting. So whether we're exploring a vanished colony or a mysterious ancient city, you'll learn something new while immersing yourself in a captivating mystery. And now for that small favor I mentioned earlier. I want to encourage you to post your thoughts and any relevant research you come across in the comments section below each episode. That way, each episode will become a community project, a shared experience where we can discuss our findings and theories together. So sit back, relax and get ready to embark on a journey through time. Who knows what secrets we might uncover along the way. Now, without further ado, let's dive right into this week's episode. Join me as we travel back in time to the late 16th century and explore the mystery of the Roanoke Colony. Picture yourself arriving in the New World in the year 1587, after a long and arduous journey across the Atlantic Ocean. You and 114 other English settlers have made it to the shores of what is now North Carolina, excited for adventure and eager to start your new lives in this untamed wilderness. You and your fellow colonists set about the task of building a town. The men chop down trees and erect sturdy wooden houses, while the women gather flowers and herbs, marveling at the lush vegetation that surrounds them. Children chase each other through the forest, their laughter echoing through the tall trees. It's a picture-perfect scene, a glimpse of life in the early days of the Roanoke Colony. But as idyllic as this moment seems, it's important to remember that life in the colony was far from easy. Hostile Native American tribes lurk in the shadows, ready to attack. Disease and starvation are constant threats, and the relentless heat and humidity of the North Carolina coast can be stifling and oppressive. Despite these challenges, the colony perseveres. For 3 years, the settlers work hard to build a sustainable community, planting crops, raising livestock and forging alliances with friendly Native Americans. They face hardship and tragedy, but also joy and triumph. Then in 1590, when supply ships arrive from England, they find the town deserted. The settlers have vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that has endured for more than 4 centuries. Imagine the shock and confusion of the English supply team arriving at Roanoke in 1590 only to find the colony abandoned. What could have caused the entire population to vanish without a trace? Did they succumb to disease, violence, or did they simply disappear into the vast wilderness? As the team explores the deserted town, they find clues that may hold the key to the colony's disappearance. An overturned chair, a half-finished meal, a child's toy lying in the dirt. Each object tells a story of the lives that once thrived here and adds to the sense of mystery surrounding the colony's fate. The supply team scours the area for answers, searching for signs of struggle or evidence of a mass exodus. But their investigation turns up nothing conclusive, only deepening the enigma of the vanished colony. As you listen to this, take a moment to appreciate the rich tapestry of life in the early colonial days. Picture the bustling marketplace filled with settlers from various backgrounds, each bringing their unique skills and traditions to the New World. There are merchants from London, farmers from the countryside, artisans from the burgeoning middle class. All are united by their desire for a new life in the Americas. Imagine the vibrant mix of languages and accents as settlers from different corners of England mingle and trade. There's the lilting brogue of the Irishman, the clipped tones of the Englishman, the lilting tones of the Scotsman. Each voice adds to the rich cultural fabric of the colony. Amidst the hustle and bustle, you spot an old woman sitting on a stool outside her house. Her name is Elizabeth, and she's one of the few people in the colony who remembers life back in England. She speaks with a wistful tone about the rolling hills and quaint villages she left behind, but also with gratitude for the opportunities that await her in this new land. As you chat with Elizabeth, you can't help but feel a sense of wonder about the past. Here you are in the present, listening to someone who has bridged two worlds, and for a moment, time seems to stand still. You're caught between the nostalgia of the past and the excitement of the future, realizing that you are part of a continuous story that stretches back centuries. It's a powerful feeling, and you know that wherever you go in life, you'll carry this memory with you always. Now, picture yourself strolling through the bustling streets of Roanoke town, the heart of the English colony in the late 16th century. The air is alive with the sounds of daily life, from the rhythmic pounding of a blacksmith's hammer to the lively chatter of merchants hawking their wares. The streets are a vibrant mix of people, including fellow English settlers, indigenous tribes members, and even escaped African slaves seeking refuge in the colony. As you navigate the crowded thoroughfares, you can't help but notice the architectural diversity of the town. There are sturdy timber-framed houses, cozy thatched cottages, and even grand manor estates belonging to some of the wealthier settlers. Each building is a testament to the hard work and ingenuity of the colonists, as they strive to build a new life in this untamed wilderness. As you continue your exploration of Roanoke town, you come across a group of men gathered around a tavern, engaged in a heated discussion about the latest news from England. The men are a mix of ages and social classes, united by their interest in the political and economic affairs of their homeland. You lean in closer to try to catch their conversation, and you hear them talk about the growing tensions between England and Spain, the powerful monarch Queen Elizabeth I, and the ongoing struggles to establish a stable government in the colony. Their words paint a picture of a world that is both familiar and strange, a world of kings and queens, of battles and intrigue, and for a moment you feel connected to the wider world beyond the shores of North America. If you're enjoying this episode and you want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. For a small monthly fee, you can join my growing community of supporters and gain access to exclusive perks like early access to ad-free episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and the ability to submit your own questions and ideas for future episodes. To learn more, simply click the link in the description below or visit our website directly. Your support means the world to us and allows us to keep bringing you top-quality historical tales. So why wait? Join today and become part of the family. Thanks for listening. In the bustling marketplace of Roanoke town, you see an old weathered book lying on a merchant's stall. Its pages are filled with tales of adventure, romance, and danger, transporting you to a world of knights and dragons, of daring quests and mythical creatures. As you turn the brittle pages, you can almost feel the centuries-old paper beneath your fingertips and hear the echo of the author's quill scratching across the parchment. Each story is a portal to another time and place, allowing you to escape the everyday reality of colonial life for a few stolen moments. And as the sun sets over the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, you realize that you have stumbled upon a treasure trove of stories that have survived the test of time. I hope you enjoyed this immersive journey through the world of the Roanoke Colony. If you want to learn more about this fascinating mystery, I encourage you to check out the additional resources I've linked in the description below. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode in the comments section below, and if you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe and join us back here every week for more historical tales. Thanks for joining me on this adventure through time. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the past. Chapter 1: England's Dream of a New World in 1588. The year after the Spanish Armada had sailed up the English Channel and attempted to invade England, an English courtier named Sir Walter Raleigh stood before Queen Elizabeth I and asked her for a favor. He was hoping to get her to sign a charter that would allow him to establish a settlement in North America, and given that the Queen had recently defeated the Spanish Armada and was on good terms with Spain's rival, Portugal, it seemed like the perfect time to ask. But when Raleigh approached her, he didn't have much luck. Elizabeth was busy plotting out how she was going to conquer Spain herself, but Raleigh wasn't done trying to convince her. He kept coming back and asking until finally, on March 1585, after yet another one of his pleading, she agreed to sign the charter. It gave Raleigh and his heirs the right to take possession of any unsettled lands they could find in the New World and gave them the title of the first and second Baron of Raleigh. It also granted Raleigh the right to appoint a governor, a chancellor and a secretary to manage the colony and collect taxes from its residents. Basically everything that was needed to run a colony. It also gave them the right to demand labor from the native populations and use them to mine for gold. It wasn't exactly what Raleigh had hoped for. In fact, he had originally wanted to go to South America to conquer the Spanish colonies there, but Raleigh had learned that there were already too many Spanish settlements in South America, and so he shifted his attention north to a place that the Spanish hadn't settled yet. And with that charter in hand, Raleigh set about conquering the New World. His first order of business was sending 2 ships to explore the coast of North America, which at this point the Portuguese had mapped, but the English did not. They were to sail west from the tip of southwestern Ireland and head to the Grand Banks of Terra Nova, or Newfoundland, where they could either turn around and head home or continue on to find more land. This journey would be led by 2 experienced explorers, one English and one Portuguese, Captains Philip Amadus and George de Cardonas, who were both veterans of many long sea voyages. The ships set sail in May of 1584, reached the Grand Banks of Newfoundland on June, then began heading south. After about 6 weeks of sailing, they had found nothing new, so they turned back north and headed home. They arrived in Ireland in September. During their voyage, they had explored the eastern coast of North America from Newfoundland all the way down to what is today North Carolina. While they never found any new lands, they did find plenty of fish, and especially off the coast of Newfoundland, where they anchored for a while. The fishing was so good that they actually ended up staying for several weeks. When they returned to England, they reported back to Raleigh, telling him that the area was full of fish and other wildlife and that it would be a great place to establish a colony, but they said nothing about settling the area themselves. So Raleigh decided to send them back again the following year to look for a better spot to establish a colony. The ships set sail on May 1585, reached the Grand Banks of Newfoundland on June, then began heading south. Amadas and de Cardenas were joined by a third captain, Simon Town, who was to lead the colony once they established it. The 3 captains headed south along the coast, and it wasn't long before they found something interesting. On July, they landed near present-day Nags Head, North Carolina, and here they found some people who were not English or Spanish or Portuguese. They were Native Americans. The captains quickly made contact with the natives and found that they were friendly. They traded with them for a bit and then moved further south to try to find somewhere to settle. The only problem was that they never found anywhere suitable to establish a colony. So after exploring the coast for a few weeks, they turned north and headed home. When they arrived back in England, they told Raleigh that the area was basically worthless, because it was full of trees instead of gold mines. But they also said that they had seen the natives there using spears made of sharp rocks, which meant that the natives there probably weren't very friendly. Therefore, Raleigh should just forget about the whole thing. Raleigh, however, didn't listen. Instead, he called the area Virginia in honor of the Virgin Queen and prepared to establish a colony there anyway. And a few months later, the first group of settlers arrived in Roanoke and founded the first English colony in North America. But the story of Roanoke is not my story to tell. You can read about it in pretty much any book about early American history, and if you want to hear the story of the lost colony, well, I encourage you to read some of those books, too. I'm working on a different kind of series, one that doesn't just rehash old stories, but explores things about the early modern period that aren't often talked about. But let me just say this. While England establishing a colony in North America seems like a small blip in world history, it was actually a very big deal. And not just because it was the beginning of the English colonization of North America, but because it represented a change in the way England viewed itself. For centuries, England had been nothing more than a minor player in Europe. Sure, it had beaten back the Vikings and established itself as a kingdom, then overthrown the king and established itself as a republic. But even after becoming a major power in Europe, it still had a long way to go before it could compete with the likes of Spain and Portugal. But with the discovery of North America, England had the opportunity to become a true global power. For the first time, it had access to lands outside of Europe and the potential riches that came with them. And it wouldn't be easy. There were already Spanish colonies in North America, and the Portuguese had been there for decades. But if England could establish a foothold there, it could grow from there and eventually challenge the Spanish and Portuguese empires, and it all started with the establishment of Roanoke. So while it may seem like just a footnote in world history, the founding of Roanoke was actually a very big deal. And if you want to learn more about it, well, you're gonna have to stay tuned because I'm just getting started. Thanks for watching. Sign up for the email list for updates. Check out the podcast available on various platforms, and if you haven't already, please follow on social media. The links are below. North America was not unsettled land. There were millions of people living there, and over the next few chapters we're going to meet a few of them. In the meantime though, let us talk about how England managed to get itself into a position where it could conquer North America in the first place. If you've ever looked at a map of Europe, you know that England isn't a particularly large country. In fact, it's rather small. Yet it became one of the most powerful countries in the world during the early modern period. How did it do it? Well, it helped that it had a strong navy. To learn more about how England built its navy and used it to conquer the seas, check out the series on another channel. New episodes premiere every Thursday. Chapter 2, The 1587 Expedition, Hopes and Hardships. It's me. This is the first episode in our series about the lost colony of Roanoke. If you're just joining us, be sure to check out episode 1 where we covered the events leading up to the 1587 expedition. And if you stick with us through the end of this episode, we'll tell you how you can get early access to our audio podcast before anyone else. In August of 1587, Governor John White and his fleet arrived off the coast of North Carolina. He had 3 ships, the Ark, the Dove, and the Pelican, and with him around 115 settlers, men, women, and children, the largest group of English to ever set foot in North America, and the first time a sizable group of women and children had come to the New World with the hopes of making a permanent home here. It was a big step for the colony and the first real attempt at an English settlement in North America. The previous 2 attempts, the ones at Newfoundland and Florida, were small groups of men only who came ashore briefly for exploration or fishing and then left. But this time things were different. This time they planned to stay. But there was a problem. They were supposed to be in Chesapeake Bay. This is what Sir Francis Drake had told them when he dropped them off. The plan was for them to settle near one of the Chesapeake's many inlets and construct a fort out of the ship's masts. But they were not there. Instead, they were on Roanoke Island. Now, we don't know exactly what happened. Perhaps Drake made a navigational error, or perhaps he intentionally dropped them off here, so that they could establish a closer trading relationship with the powerful chief of the local tribe. But they were here now, and they needed to make the best of it. So they went to work unloading their ships. One by one they hauled barrels and crates ashore, along with livestock, muskets, tools, nails, dried food, barrels of water from the hold of the ships. They also brought with them the English flag, and according to one account, they planted it on shore beside a great oak tree, which we believe may have been this one right here. They unloaded their ships while the men rowed back and forth from the fleet to shore. Women and children stood knee-deep in the water, hauling things in. When the ships were empty, they either pulled them under the keel and sank them, or they ran them aground and left them there. Then they turned their attention to building a fort out of the longboat's masts. They cut down trees and made a palisade wall around 16 feet high. They built houses inside the fort, some with wattle and daub construction, weaving branches and mud into walls. Others were more permanent, built of wood and brick. John White and his wife Ellen settled in a small house close to the waterfront. Their daughter Eleanor had come with them, but she would be leaving soon, returning to England with her aunt, where she would live the rest of her life. As they worked, the settlers struggled with the oppressive heat and humidity of the North Carolina summer, something they were not used to back in England, and they fought off mosquitoes, gnats, and other biting insects. Life was hard. Yet when the sun went down, they gathered around their fires and celebrated their first night on land with music, dancing, and singing. They feasted on roasted venison and drank to the success of the colony. We don't know much about what happened next. There are no contemporary accounts of the colony in 1587. The only record we have is a letter written by John White to Sir Francis Drake, asking him to return to fetch them in 2 years. In the letter he says everything is very calm and quiet with the natives. We have given them some token of our love. They have done us good offices, and we do live in good hope and expectation of supply, so all seems to be going well. Then 3 years pass, and everything changes. When Sir Francis Drake finally returned to the coast of North Carolina in 1590 to take the colony back to England, they were nowhere to be found. The only sign of them was the word Croatoan carved into a post, and the letters CRO etched into a nearby tree. Today, historians generally agree that the colony didn't fare well once John White left for England. He had hoped to return with supplies in 2 years, but supply ships kept getting cancelled due to the ongoing war between England and Spain. Again, we have no first-hand accounts from the colony during this time, so we don't know what happened when supplies didn't arrive as expected, but eventually, sometime after 1590, the starving colonists likely fled into the interior, perhaps joining the friendly Croatoan tribe, but whatever happened to them, they vanished without a trace, leaving behind only 2 names, the lost colony of Roanoke and Virginia Dare. The first English child born in the Americas, Virginia Dare. Think about that for a moment. She was born in the middle of a fort being built on a remote barrier island off the coast of an unexplored continent. Her father was a builder helping construct a new world for the English. Her mother was Ellen, the wife of Governor John White, one of only about 24 women who landed on this island. We don't know the exact date of her birth, only that it was in August of 1587, somewhere around the time they arrived. We do know that her birthday was celebrated with a party. According to one account, there were 15 or 20 women present, all wearing their finest clothes, and they feasted on roasted peacock and other meats, along with wine, beer, and fruits. We can imagine the celebration took place within the wooden palisade they built on the beach. Maybe it was a warm evening and the women sat around a fire with their children playing at their feet. They sipped their wine and beer, ate fruit, nuts, and roasted meat. They talked about England, about family and friends they'd left behind, about the journey across the ocean and the hardships they'd faced landing in the New World. And as the fire crackled and popped, they sang songs and told stories. Maybe one woman played a lute or a flute and the others joined in harmony, singing of Robin Hood or other English ballads. Maybe they told tales of mythical creatures and heroes and gods, stories that had been passed down for generations, stories that gave meaning to their lives and helped them survive. Then, as the fire burned low and the stars came out, they watched shooting stars streak across the sky and made wishes. And as the night wore on and the fire died out, they tucked their children in for bed, thankful for the bounty of the day and hopeful for the future of their colony and their daughter. Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas, whatever the future held, they knew she would grow up knowing that she was part of something special, part of a new world where anything was possible. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can get early access to the next one by subscribing to our audio podcast, available on various platforms. Our podcast is a companion podcast to our video series. Each week we publish a new episode covering a different aspect of the lost colony of Roanoke. You can listen to our episodes here or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you all for listening. I'm your host. Stay tuned for more. Well, this is a bit awkward. In the last episode, we saw the survivors of the ill-fated Roanoke Colony forced to flee their settlement and live among the local Native Americans after their fort was destroyed in a hurricane. This isn't ideal. So let's see how things go in Chapter 3 of this thrilling tale of survival. We find ourselves on Ocracoke Island, off the coast of what would become North Carolina. It's not long after the arrival of the settlers, and things are going poorly. The natives here are not happy with these interlopers from Europe, and there's tension in the air between the two cultures. The leader of the local tribe, one Tensor, is a powerful man, and he has reason to be upset. His people, the Secretan, have been pushed further inland by other tribes, the Croatoan and the Roanoke, and they're now living on land that is far less hospitable. The Europeans have arrived at the worst possible moment, and the timing couldn't be worse. The settlers are, to be honest, also having a pretty terrible time. Their supplies are dwindling, and there doesn't seem to be any easy way to replenish them. It's not like they can just walk into town and pick some up at the grocery store. There are also frequent storms which damage their boats and make travel difficult. And to top it all off, the natives aren't exactly being welcoming. Things aren't looking good for the English. But let's think about what the natives must be feeling in this situation. They've been pushed from their ancestral lands by other tribes, and now this new threat appears. From their perspective, the Europeans are clearly a danger, and they don't know why these people have come or what they want. All they know is that they need to protect themselves. Can you blame them? Imagine if one day you're minding your own business, living on your land, and then suddenly a bunch of strangers show up and start building stuff and generally making a nuisance of themselves. You'd probably be a little tense, too. That said, I think it's worth speculating about what the settlers might be feeling in this situation. We know that they're running low on supplies and that things aren't going well, but what about their mental state? Are they lonely? Are they hopeful? Are they scared? I think it's safe to say that they're feeling all of these things and more. They're far from home and family, and they don't know what the future holds for them. All they can do is try to make the best of a bad situation and hope for the best. Gentle speculation over it's time to get back to the awkwardness. Back on Ocracoke Island, the settlers are getting increasingly desperate for supplies. They've been living off the land and haven't had a decent meal in weeks. They're starting to get sick, and many are too weak to work. John White, the leader of the settlers, knows that something must be done. He can't watch his people starve to death, but he's also not sure what to do. There are two options that are open to him. The first option is to stay on the island and try to grow crops and hunt animals for food. This is a risky strategy, though, as the settlers are already weak and the local tribes may attack them. The second option is to sail back to England and get supplies dropped off. This is also a risky strategy though, as the settlers don't know what the weather will be like and they may never return. White knows that either option could be their last chance at survival, and he needs to choose wisely. In the end, White decides to sail back to England. He says goodbye to the settlers and boards a ship with a few others. They set sail for England and White hopes that they'll be able to return with supplies soon. The rest of the settlers are left on the island to fend for themselves, and White prays that they'll be okay. I think it's worth pointing out that while this story has elements of survival and adventure, it also has a lot to say about colonization and the impact that Europeans had on Native Americans. The settlers in this story are not the first Europeans to arrive in the Americas, and they won't be the last. There are many stories of colonization that were lost to history, but we can learn a lot from them nonetheless. For example, this story shows the challenges that early Europeans faced when they tried to colonize the Americas. They were not prepared for the harsh conditions and often had to rely on the help of Native Americans to survive. It also shows the impact that colonization had on Native Americans. The settlers in this story are a threat to the local tribes, and they're often portrayed as savages who are uncivilized and dangerous. This is a common trope in stories about colonization, but it's important to remember that Native Americans were real people with their own cultures and societies. They were not just obstacles to be overcome by the settlers. It's also interesting to think about how this story would have been different if it had been told from the perspective of a Native American. How would the story have been different if the settlers had been the ones being hunted and killed? Would the story still be considered a classic? Would the settlers still be seen as heroes? These are difficult questions to answer, but it's important to keep them in mind as we read and discuss stories about colonization. The settlers eventually return from England with supplies, and the colony is able to continue for a few more years. However, it is clear that the settlers are not welcome on the island, and they are only able to stay because the locals don't want to risk angering the English. The colony eventually fails and the settlers are forced to flee once again. This time they are not able to find the same level of hospitality from the locals and many of them die. Only a few survive and they're forever changed by their experience in the new world. As we bring this episode to a close, we're left to wonder what the future holds for the English colonies in America. Will they be able to succeed where other European powers have failed? Or will they too be driven back to Europe by the harsh conditions and hostile natives? Only time will tell. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe, so you never miss an episode. We're always looking for ways to improve our videos, so please feel free to leave any feedback or suggestions in the comments below. We'll be sure to take them into consideration as we move forward. Thanks again for watching and we'll see you next time. Chapter 4. England in Turmoil. Part 1. Raleigh had promised Sir Francis Drake that he would return to Roanoke by Christmas of 1587 at the latest. But as the months dragged on without any word from Raleigh, White began to grow anxious. He wrote letters to his friend, Sir Robert Heath, asking for news of Raleigh or of a ship to take him back to North Carolina. But all he got were replies telling him to be patient, that there was nothing to worry about, that Raleigh was working on it. And so White waited, growing more and more concerned. But why was Raleigh taking so long? What was keeping him from returning to Roanoke? Well, it turns out that the previous year, 1588, England had gone to war with Spain. You may have heard of this conflict. It was known as the Spanish Armada, though the war itself was much larger than just a single armada, or fleet of ships. The English had been preparing for war with Spain for several years. Queen Elizabeth I had long been at odds with King Philip II of Spain over control of the seas, over trade routes, and over who had the right to rule England. In 1585, Elizabeth had sent an armed force to assist the Dutch rebels fighting for independence against the Spanish in the Netherlands. Then, 2 years later, in 1587, when England seized a Spanish treasure ship that had laden with gold and silver off the coast of the Azores, it was clear that war was imminent. Now, we'll be honest with you, we could spend hours talking about the Spanish Armada. There are dozens of books written about this event alone, so if you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to visit your local library or check out some online resources. We'll put links to some good ones in our description below. The Spanish Armada consisted of two parts: a large invasion fleet which would bring troops to England, and a smaller fleet which would sail along the English Channel to distract the English navy. The idea was that while the English fleet was dealing with the invasion fleet, the smaller fleet would sail through the Channel and surprise the English by landing troops behind their lines. But what actually happened was almost the exact opposite, because although the English fleet was outnumbered, they were faster and more maneuverable, and so they were able to avoid the bulk of the Spanish fleet. They also used new technologies like the fireship to attack the larger Spanish vessels. These fireships were small boats filled with black powder and red-hot musket balls that would be sent crashing into the sides of enemy ships, setting them ablaze. Now, after failing to land troops in England, the Spanish invasion fleet sailed back home, though not before suffering great losses due to storms and disease. The English fleet pursued them, hoping to inflict further damage. So as you can probably imagine, with a war raging in the Atlantic, Sir Walter Raleigh couldn't just pop over to North Carolina for a little fun in the sun. No, he was busy fighting the Spanish. And the thing is, even though the war with Spain isn't really relevant to the story of Roanoke, the events of the Armada did play a part in shaping England's future, a future which would ultimately determine the fate of the Roanoke Colony. See, for most of the country's history, England had been a constitutional monarchy, meaning that technically the country was ruled by a king or queen, but that monarch had to follow laws and customs laid down in a document called the Magna Carta. However, as a result of the war with Spain, the English people began to look to the monarch as a kind of war leader, someone who led the country in times of conflict rather than a figurehead who simply followed the laws of the land. And in the years following the Armada, the English people granted the monarch more power, pushing the country further away from being a constitutional monarchy and towards an absolute monarchy. That meant that the power of the English monarch would only increase in the years to come, leading eventually to a point where one monarch could essentially do whatever they wanted with no oversight from Parliament or the people. And that would spell disaster for the Roanoke colonies. Because, as we've already mentioned, the early colonies of Roanoke and New England were all privately funded ventures. They had no government backing, at least under Elizabeth I. But when James I took the throne in 1603, things would change, and it would all be because of a tiny group of sailors who had sailed across the Atlantic over a century earlier. So the Spanish Armada was obviously a huge deal. It had enormous implications for England, for Europe, and even for the Americas. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. This is a light-hearted retelling of the story of Roanoke, so let's move on. Back in Roanoke, White anxiously awaited word from England. As autumn turned to winter, he imagined his family and friends celebrating Christmas in England. Celebrating without him. Was his daughter, Eleanor, well? Had she begun school yet? How were his mother and father? Did they still attend church every Sunday? Even his dog Pompey crossed his mind. Was Pompey lonely without him? Had the cat stopped hissing at the dog? These thoughts plagued him as he wandered the deserted beach, watching the waves crash ashore, always listening for the cry of a returning ship. But the sea remained silent. The people of the Roanoke Colony grew restless. Some wanted to leave, to go back to England, even if it meant leaving the settlement unfinished. Others wanted to stay and fight for the colony, to prove that they were capable of living in the New World. They argued loudly and often, their voices echoing across the sound as they debated the future of the colony, the future of their lives. White never joined these arguments. Instead, he kept to himself, wandering the shoreline, gathering shells and stones, anything to keep his mind off the pain in his heart. He found comfort in the natural world around him. He studied the plants and animals, trying to learn their names and understand their habits. He watched the seasons change, the leaves turn from green to gold to brown and then fall to the ground, covering the forest floor in a thick blanket. He saw deer and wild turkeys and an occasional bear. Once he even saw a wolf. But for the most part, the wilderness was silent. There were few birds singing, few insects buzzing. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the waves crashing ashore, a constant reminder of his isolation. Still, he pressed on, trying to find beauty in the natural world around him. He walked for hours each day, sometimes not returning to camp until late in the afternoon. He collected samples of everything he saw, rocks and shells and plants, anything that might be useful to the colony or, more importantly, anything that might help him make sense of his surroundings. He kept his collection in a small hut he built near the shore, a place where he could escape the noise of the other colonists and be alone with his thoughts. One day, as he was exploring the area around his collection hut, he came across something that made him stop in his tracks. It was a bird, a small bird with a red breast and a black head. And as he watched, it landed on a nearby tree and began to sing. It was the first bird song he had heard in months, and it brought tears to his eyes. In that moment he felt a surge of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, they would make it. Maybe they could build a life here in this new world. He spent the rest of the day exploring the area around the bird sanctuary, walking for miles along the coast and inland. He found more birds, more signs of life, more reasons to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would be okay. He returned to the colony that evening with a newfound sense of purpose. He knew that he had to do everything he could to help the colony succeed, not just for himself, but for his daughter, for his family, for the people who had put their faith in him. And so he began to work, to plan, to organize. He helped the colonists build better homes, more sustainable farms. He encouraged them to explore the area, to find new sources of food and new ways to survive. He worked tirelessly, hoping to create a life for himself and the other colonists in this new world. Thank you for listening to this episode of the story of Roanoke. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on whatever platform you're using to listen. Reviews help other people find the podcast, and they keep us motivated to keep making new episodes. You can also follow us on social media to get updates on new episodes and to share your thoughts on the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Chapter 5. The Empty Settlement. The year is 1590. For 4 years, the fate of the Roanoke Colony has been a mystery. 3 years ago, when John White returned to the settlement for supplies, he found it deserted. The inhabitants had vanished without a trace. But as he explored the settlement, he discovered that they'd left behind an awful lot of stuff. Their tools, and their weapons, even their clothes, all neatly laid out as if they were planning to come back. And though he didn't know it, their abandoned fort was surrounded by the skeletons of those who tried to relieve them. And now, after an absence of 3 years, White is finally returning to Roanoke with 2 ships full of settlers eager to start their new lives in the new world. But what will they find when they arrive? Will the colony be repopulated, or will its inhabitants have disappeared again? Let's find out. When John White first arrived at Roanoke, he found the settlement in disarray. Houses were dismantled, belongings were strewn about, and there was no sign of a struggle. What had happened to the colonists? Where did they go? Had they been attacked by Indians, by pirates, or had they simply packed up and gone home? As he searched for answers, he stumbled upon an old post marked with the name of one of the settlements on Croatoan Island, and carved into it was the word Croatoan. Could this be a clue to what happened here? White wasn't sure, but he decided to follow up on it. He and his crew set sail for Croatoan Island, where they found more clues that only deepened the mystery. On a tree, White saw the letters Crow carved into the bark, but this time it wasn't just a single letter. It was a whole word, Corsa, meaning from in Old English. Had the colonists fled to Croatoan Island and then left again? If so, where did they go? White and his men scoured the island for signs of the missing colonists, but they found nothing. There was no sign of a camp, no discarded tools or weapons, and no bones. It was as if the colonists had never been there at all. But what about their boats? Surely they wouldn't have abandoned their boats. They would have taken those with them if they fled. But when White and his crew arrived on Croatoan, they found that the boats were also missing. This is where things get weird because, according to the accounts of the time, one of the ships that arrived with White had a watertight compartment, like a safe, where important documents were kept, and this compartment was unlocked, but the documents were gone, all except for one sheet of paper which read, quote, "A true relation of the state of the colony remaining in the island of Virginia." But the rest of the document was torn off, leaving us with more questions than answers. So they did what any reasonable people would do. They decided to wait around the island until the colonists returned. Are you telling me that these guys spent months waiting on an island for the people who had apparently left the island to come back to the very same island? I'm sorry, but that's just silly. You don't need me to tell you that the people aren't coming back. Not only that, but the people who left earlier didn't take anything with them, so they had no intention of returning. Waiting around for them to come back is just plain dumb. These guys should have gotten in their boats and left right away, but they didn't. They stayed on that island for over a month, probably eating their heads off, wondering what happened here. And during that time, the crew grew impatient. They wanted to leave, but they couldn't agree on what to do. Some wanted to head to England, but others thought they should stay in the New World. So they argued back and forth, day after day, until finally, one of the crew members wrote this, quote, "The end of August approached, and our victuals being scant, we were enforced to return towards England, and with that they got in their boats and sailed away, leaving the mystery of Roanoke unsolved." But there's more. According to this same account, when White returned to England, he brought back 3 people with him, including a man named Thomas Harriot, and Harriot was a scientist who collected specimens of plants, animals and minerals from the New World, and some of these specimens made their way to the British Museum, where they remain to this day. So here's my question: if the museum has these specimens, then why does everyone think that Harriet never went to the New World? Think about it. If Harriet really did go to America, why would he bring back artifacts from a place that doesn't exist? That makes no sense. It's much more likely that he got the specimens from somewhere else, maybe from one of the other colonies in the area. But there's more evidence that Harriet was actually at Roanoke. In 1589, when White returned to England, he published a book about his experiences in the New World, and he included a map that showed the location of Roanoke, and on that map he labeled Croatoan Island as the place where the colonists had gone, and he even gave the island a name, calling it Harriet's Hope. But that's not all. There's another document that sheds light on what really happened at Roanoke. It's called The True Report of the Proceedings of Sir Francis Drake in Virginia, and it tells the story of how Drake arrived at Roanoke in 1586, only to find the colony in ruins. And in this account, Drake himself says that he spoke with one of the colonists who told him what happened, and here's what the survivor said, quote, "We were all one day gathering grapes in a plain, which is 1.5 miles from the fort. And in our absence, a great number of those savages entered the town, slew and carried away captive all the women and children, and burned our houses and boats. We escaped in a small shallop, and so we have lived on a bare and rocky point of land since September last, having nothing to sustain life but the grapes we gathered and such fish as we could catch." And that's where the story ends. Well, almost. There's one more thing I want to talk about, something that really bothered me as I was researching this episode, and that's the fact that nobody seems to know what happened to the Native Americans. Did they just disappear? Did they go back to living in the woods? Or did they integrate with the colonists? I mean, it's obvious that the Native Americans played a role in the founding of this colony, but what happened to them after that? We don't know, and that's a shame. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, be sure to check out the next one, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and leave a comment below to let me know what you think. I'll see you next time. Hello and welcome to this house. This is Chapter 6, and in this episode we're going to talk about theories through the centuries. It's been almost 2 years since I first began sharing stories of the lost colony of Roanoke, and along the way, historians have come up with all kinds of ideas as to what could have happened to the 115 English settlers who vanished from the Outer Banks of North Carolina in the late 1580s. In earlier episodes, we've explored some of those theories that were proposed in the 19th and 20th centuries. But today we're going to go back even further and look at some ideas that were published before 1900. Now, let's get into it. The first theory we were going to discuss today was published by Edward Dorrellman in 1834. He suggested that the colonists had joined the Croatoan tribe and lived out the remainder of their lives peacefully among the Native Americans. Now, if you're familiar with this channel, then you know that there's evidence both for and against this idea. On the one hand, when John White returned to Roanoke in 1590, he reported that the word Croatoan was carved into a post. In addition, the English explorer Arthur Ballow, who was part of Sir Francis Drake's 1585 voyage to North America, reported that the local natives told him that a group of English men and women had come ashore in a ship and lived among them in peace. Now, there are several instances where the word Croatoan appears in the historical record after 1590. For example, the shipwrecked sailor Philip Amictus, who spent 3 years living with the Croatoan people, described them as a very numerous and powerful tribe located near the coast in 1622. Thomas Harriot also wrote that the Croatoan were a coastal tribe in 1585, but the English colony was established about 50 miles inland from the coast. So if the colonists had moved inland after making first contact with the Croatoan people, it would make sense that they were not found by subsequent explorers, who primarily focused their search along the coast. On the other hand, the Croatoan people who lived in present-day North Carolina during the late 16th century were known to be fierce warriors. They fought multiple wars with neighboring tribes and were renowned for their skill in battle. It's unlikely that the English settlers, who were ill-prepared for life in the New World and had no experience in warfare, would have been able to defend themselves, let alone hold their own in battle against the Croatoan people. Another problem with this theory is that when John White returned to Roanoke in 1590, he did not find any evidence that the settlers had lived in harmony with the Croatoan people. If the colonists had lived in relative peace with the Native Americans for several years, it's reasonable to assume that some kind of cordial relationship would have continued even after their disappearance. Yet when White searched for his daughter-in-law and grandchildren, who had been living among the Croatoan people, he was unable to find them either, and he never saw any evidence that they had been living with the Croatoan people, such as English-style houses or household items like cooking pots. The second theory we'll discuss today was published in 1877 by the Reverend J.T.C. Walker, who believed that the colonists had moved inland from Roanoke Island to settle in the area around present-day Chesapeake, Virginia. Now, in order for this theory to be true, the settlers would have had to travel north along the coast, then west across the Great Dismal Swamp, which is roughly 45 miles wide, then east again to settle near Chesapeake Bay. It's possible that they may have traveled by boat along the coast, then used dugout canoes to navigate the swamp, but there are several problems with this theory. First, the settlers likely did not have the supplies necessary to sustain them on such a long journey. Second, when John Smith explored the Chesapeake Bay area in 1608, he reported that he saw no evidence that the English had ever been there. If the Roanoke colonists had settled near Chesapeake Bay, it seems likely that at least some of them would have been seen by the English explorers and colonists, who arrived in the following decades. Third, the climate and geography of the Chesapeake Bay area are quite different from that of the Outer Banks. The colonists would have faced cooler temperatures, higher rainfall, and more wooded areas, which may have made it difficult for them to adapt. However, this theory does account for the absence of the colony at its original site and the lack of evidence left behind. It's possible that the settlers may have dismantled their houses and taken their belongings with them, making it more difficult for later explorers to find evidence of their presence. Now, the next theory was published by Virginia Carroll in 1902. She believed that the colonists were attacked and killed by the Spanish. Now, this theory is based on the belief that the Roanoke colonists were attacked by the Spanish, who were known to be in the area at the time. The Spanish explorer Pedro de Una surveyed the coast of North Carolina in 1585 and claimed it for Spain. The English colonists who arrived at Roanoke in 1587, therefore, were technically on Spanish territory. The Spanish may have seen the English settlement as a threat to their colonial ambitions in the region and attacked the colonists to prevent them from establishing a permanent settlement. There are a few problems with this theory. First, there is no direct evidence that the Spanish were involved in the disappearance of the Roanoke colonists. Second, the Spanish did not have a large military presence in the New World at the time, and it's unlikely that they would have been able to launch a surprise attack on the English settlement. Third, if the Spanish had attacked the colonists, it seems likely that they would have left behind some kind of evidence, such as weapons or other belongings. Alright, now let's talk about a theory that was published by Dr. William S. E. Miles in 1895. He thought that the colonists perished from disease. Now, this theory is supported by the fact that infectious diseases were common in the New World and could easily wipe out a small settlement. For example, the Spanish conquistadors who explored and conquered the Aztec Empire in the early 16th century were accompanied by several hundred men, but only about 12 survived to return to Spain. The others died from diseases such as smallpox, which had been brought over from Europe. There are a few problems with this theory. First, there is no direct evidence that disease was responsible for the disappearance of the Roanoke colonists. Second, if disease was the cause, it seems likely that there would have been some kind of epidemic before the colony was completely wiped out. However, if we assume that the colonists gradually succumbed to disease over a period of months or years, it would explain why there was no evidence of a struggle or why there was no trace of the colony after repeated searches. And finally, let us discuss a theory published by Cyrus Thomas in 1894. He believed that the colonists were lost or killed in a natural disaster. Now, this theory is supported by the fact that the Outer Banks of North Carolina are known for their wild weather and have been the site of several shipwrecks. A storm could have easily destroyed the colony and washed away any evidence of its existence. In addition, a drought or other natural disaster could have caused the settlers to abandon their homes and search for a more hospitable environment. Now, there are a few problems with this theory. First, there is no direct evidence that a natural disaster struck the Roanoke colonists. Second, if a storm had destroyed the colony, it seems likely that there would have been some kind of wreckage or debris left behind. Alright, so those are the theories regarding what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke that were published before 1900. It's important to note that these theories were published in the 19th century when the historical record was much less complete than it is today. Since then, archaeologists have discovered additional evidence that sheds light on the fate of the Roanoke colonists. Unfortunately, none of these theories have been proven to be true, and the mystery of what happened to the colony remains unsolved. I hope you enjoyed learning about the theories regarding what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke. Make sure to subscribe for new episodes every week, and thank you for watching. Bye. Alright, so for those of you who are just tuning in, this is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke. And if you haven't already done so, then make sure to go back and start at the beginning because it really helps to set the stage. Also, while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe. Now, in Chapter 6, we left off with the excavations of the 1930s that had uncovered multiple dwellings and other evidence of life along the shores of Roanoke Island. But those excavations were only the beginning. There was still so much more to find. The following year, archaeologists returned to the island, this time focusing their attention on a slightly different area known as Site X. But even though the excavation here didn't turn up anything particularly exciting, the researchers believed that it was still important. They weren't sure why, but there was just something about this particular site that they couldn't quite put their finger on. More on that later. Meanwhile, excavations were also taking place just across the sound on nearby Hatteras Island, where the British had established a fort in 1586. This fort was never meant to be a permanent settlement like the one on Roanoke. It was more of a supply base to support the colony there. But despite its short duration, archaeologists have found it to be quite productive when it comes to uncovering artifacts from this time period. For example, excavations at the fort have turned up several pieces of 16th century English pottery. And more recently, a fragment of an even older Tudor merchant's mark was discovered, stamped into a plate, proving that some of the material predates the colony by more than a decade. To top it all off, archaeologists also found the remains of several structures, including a well which indicated that people had been living here for at least a few years. In total, over 400 artifacts have been discovered at the fort, many of which seem to suggest that the settlers had a pretty close relationship with the local Native Americans. For instance, archaeologists have found several items that appear to be trade goods, including iron tools and ornaments. But perhaps even more intriguing is a copper pendant in the shape of a bird. Not only is it incredibly rare to find anything made out of copper in North America before the colonial period, but archaeologists also believe that this particular pendant was made by the indigenous population. To them, the design on the pendant seems to resemble an egret or heron, which are both common sight on the Outer Banks. However, the researchers believe that the colonists may have seen these birds as they flew around the fort and then asked the natives to fashion them into a pendant. The copper itself probably came from the same source as the metal used in the native weapons and tools, likely acquired through trade with the Spanish in Florida. So what does all of this tell us about the lost colony? Well, it suggests that the English settlers didn't just show up on Roanoke Island and immediately build a fort and start growing crops. Instead, it looks like they spent several years living among the Native American tribes on Hatteras Island, learning their ways and establishing peaceful relations before they ever attempted to build a permanent settlement. And even once they did establish that settlement, it doesn't look like they abandoned life on Hatteras completely. Instead, it looks like they maintained a small presence there throughout the duration of the colony, possibly using it as a base for further exploration, or as a way to keep in touch with the native populations. As far as how long these initial supply bases remained in use before the colonists moved inland, no one is really sure. But based on the amount of artifacts found, it's safe to say that it was at least a few years. And during that time, a lot could have happened. For example, there is a gap of 7 years between the arrival of Sir Francis Drake in 1585 and the arrival of the Second Supply Fleet under the command of John White. In that time, much could have happened. The colonists could have explored the entire region, establishing friendly relations with the locals and learning everything they could about the land. They could have traveled south along the coast to present-day Florida, where the Spanish were already well established, or even ventured as far as the Caribbean. If that's true, then it's possible that when John White arrived on Roanoke in 1590, he would have found the island completely deserted. The colonists could have decided to abandon the settlement in favor of life among the natives, or even relocated to the New World's southern colonies. Either way, the existence of these supply bases paints a much more complete picture of the early English colonization of North America. It shows that it wasn't just one big leap from England to Virginia, but rather a series of smaller steps taken over the course of several years. And it also shows that the colonists were much more involved with the native populations than we previously thought. However, while these archaeological discoveries have helped to shed new light on the lost colony, they've also raised a lot of new questions. For example, archaeologists have found no evidence that the English colonists ever attempted to grow crops on either Roanoke or Hatteras Islands. So where did they get their food? Did the natives provide it for them, or did they simply live off the land through hunting and fishing? They've also found no evidence that the colonists ever built any kind of shelter on either island. So where did they stay? Did they live with the natives in their villages, or did they pitch tents while they were there? And finally, why did they leave? We know that the colony ultimately failed, but what caused its demise? Was it disease, starvation, conflict with the natives, or something else entirely? These are just some of the many questions that archaeologists hope to answer in the coming years, through continued excavations on both Roanoke and Hatteras Islands. The good news is that thanks to modern technology, they may not have to wait too much longer for answers. For example, archaeologists have recently begun using satellite imagery to identify potential sites of interest on the islands. This has already proven to be quite successful in England, where satellites have been used to map the locations of buried archaeological sites. By using a technique known as aerial photography, archaeologists can literally see through the soil and vegetation to identify areas that may contain buried artifacts. But archaeologists aren't stopping there. They're also using another technique known as ground-penetrating radar to create detailed maps of the subsurface without even having to dig. This has already helped them uncover the location of a number of buried features on both Roanoke and Hatteras Islands, including walls, pits, and even entire buildings. And what's more, they've even used this technology to identify the location of a number of shipwrecks in the shallow waters surrounding the islands. So it's as clear that archaeologists are using every tool at their disposal to try and solve the mystery of the lost colony. And while we may never know exactly what happened to the colonists, it's safe to say that we'll continue to learn more about their lives and their experiences through the artifacts they left behind. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting the channel. Until next time, hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast, and welcome to the last chapter of our series about Roanoke. Chapter 8. Roanoke in Popular Culture and Folklore. So over the years, the mystery of the lost colony has inspired all kinds of creative works. There are at least 36 known plays about the lost colony, starting with one written in 1927 by Sidney Howard, which is still occasionally performed. A novel called The White Witch by Hansel Miser was published in 1940 and is still in print today. In 1960, there was a TV pilot called The Lost Colony starring Michael Rennie and Agnes Moorehead. There's also an opera and a song cycle and several films, including a 1950 movie called The First American, which is not very good. But they don't stop there. In addition to all these mainstream productions, there are also local legends that have grown up around Roanoke. You can visit the village of Manteo and see the Lost Colony Museum, or take a ghost tour to hear spooky stories about the fort. Here's a 2017 headline from the Virginian Pilot. Author weaves tale of betrayal, murder, witchcraft in Lost Colony novel, you know. When I was researching this book, I kept coming across writers who were writing their books because they had family stories that were passed down to them, about what really happened at Roanoke. Like here's one example. This is from an author named Natalie Hickman. She wrote a novel called The Secret of Roanoke, published in 2013, and this is from the publisher's website. The author's grandmother was told the story of a silver cup hidden near the old fort at Roanoke Island and a love affair between a Native American princess and an Englishman who worked at the fort. Her grandmother's great-uncle supposedly found the cup, and so Natalie Hickman decided to write the book. So even though there's no evidence that any of this actually happened, people just keep coming up with new stories about it. One of the most enduring figures from the Lost Colony is Virginia Dare. She became the first child born to English parents in North America, and over the years, she has become something of a folk symbol for the colonial era. When playwright Paul Green wrote his play, The Lost Colony, which premiered in 1937, he gave Virginia Dare a big role. And this is her famous monologue where she expresses her confusion and sadness as she returns to the village after the settlers had disappeared. Where are they? Where are my parents? Who has come to tell me? The line "who has come to tell me" is probably the most famous line associated with the lost colony. It's in all the souvenir shops. They've got bumper stickers and t-shirts and coffee mugs that say "who has come to tell me," even though those words never actually appeared in any contemporary accounts of the lost colony. But the sentiment is understandable. I mean, we all want answers. So Virginia Dare has been portrayed on stage by hundreds of actresses over the past 8 decades, and she has inspired other works of art too. Like here, essay painting of Virginia Dare standing in the middle of the village looking out over the water. That's the official poster for the Lost Colony outdoor drama. It's pretty haunting. Now, I don't usually talk about artwork in this series, because it is mostly outside my area of expertise, but I do know that this painting has become iconic. It's a well-known piece of art associated with the colonial period in American history. In fact, I'm sure many of you already recognized it when I described it. Just like we all recognize the famous painting of George Washington at Valley Forge, these kinds of iconic images stick in our minds, and they help us to remember the events of the past. And sometimes we project things onto them. Like I talked about in Chapter 4, some people used to think that George Washington had a wooden tooth, but he didn't. He bit into a piece of bread too hard and broke one of his real teeth, but that didn't stop the legend from taking off. It was a story that people wanted to believe. And it's the same thing with this painting of Virginia Dare. We want to believe that someone like her was here, and if we believe that, then maybe we'll believe that America was a better place in the past, and we can recapture that greatness or something like that. This idea of the past being somehow better than the present is a common theme in books and movies about the lost colony, and it goes back to how the colony has influenced our identity as Americans. This idea of America as a special place that has a destiny to fulfill has deep roots in our history. And I am going to quote historian Bernard Bailyn now. This is from his 1967 book, The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution. The notion that America was somehow different from other societies, that it had a unique quality and destiny was so deeply ingrained in the colonial consciousness that the thought of severing the connection with the parent society was almost unthinkable, for to leave would be to abandon the special calling. So, it's always bothered me when people try to argue that the colonists didn't really establish a separate culture and identity and instead they were just like the English people. Yes, they were British subjects, but they were also Americans and they understood themselves that way too. They were aware that they were building a new kind of society in North America and they wanted to be free to make their own mistakes along the way. They wanted to forge their own path. Historian James Horn wrote a book called A Land of Hope and History, The American Origins of the Lost Colony, and he talks about how the colony of Roanoke helped define the early American experience. Here's what he said. Roanoke matters because its experience embodies the origins of a national story. The founding of the earliest English settlement on Roanoke embodied the hopes and dreams that inspired the first wave of British colonization and the particular dangers faced by the English in competing with the Spanish for North American empire. Its disappearance provided a powerful symbol of the fragility of civilization, the mysterious ways of Native Americans, and the limits of European understanding of the New World. After the colony was gone, its fate served as an object lesson in the perils of colonization. It also inspired enduring myths of the New World as a lure and its capacity to frustrate the purposes of humankind. So this is what I want to end with. We love mystery. We love solving puzzles. As kids, we did those Where's Waldo books. As adults, we binge-watch Murder on the Orient Express, and we will travel hours away to stand in a parking lot and hear a guy with a metal detector talk about the time when JFK was almost assassinated in Texas. And I know it sounds silly. I mean, I can explain why people get obsessed with JFK stuff. It's because his assassination changed the course of American history. But to spend so much time and energy on something that isn't fully explainable, it does seem silly. I mean, isn't it just easier to accept the ambiguity? Isn't it easier to just let go? Well, yes, it is. But we don't. We want to know. We need to know. And maybe it's because knowing gives us a sense of control. Maybe it's because mysteries help us learn about ourselves and our world. Maybe it's because we want to believe that even when everything seems lost, there's always hope for something new. I don't know, what do you think? You've reached the end of Chapter 8 of our mini-series about Roanoke. If you enjoyed this series and you want to support the channel, please consider making a donation through the link in the description below. We've got more content on our website as well. You can check out our blog posts and our other podcasts. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you next time. If there's one thing that's kept me sane over these past few years, it's been you, the community we've built here. When times are tough or things seem bleak, I know I can always count on you all for a little pick-me-up. And in that spirit, I want to talk today about community, but also about the lessons we can learn from history. Specifically Chapter 9 of this series, which is all about the lost colony of Roanoke. As a kid, the Roanoke mystery was what got me interested in history in the first place, and even now, after all these years of studying it, I still find myself thinking about it from time to time. In our last episode, we talked about how the second attempt to colonize Roanoke began and struggled through its first winter. By the following spring, the settlers had finally cleared some land and planted crops, so they were feeling pretty confident about their prospects. But there was one big problem. They hadn't prepared well enough for conflicts with the indigenous people who lived in the area, and so they were quickly at war. Their first engagement came when a group of settlers went out to hunt and found an Indian village near their fort. They killed several natives, but when they returned to the fort, they found that the natives had attacked during their absence and stolen most of their food stores, and that was just the beginning. For the next 2 years, the colonists lived under constant threat of attack, which made it difficult to do anything else, and it wasn't until the fall of 1587 that they finally got a break. A severe drought had killed many of the natives, and the survivors fled to higher ground, away from the dry coastal plain where the colonists had set up their settlement, and with their native enemies gone, the colonists were free to focus on more pleasant pursuits, like exploring the interior of the island. One such expedition was led by a man named John White, who set out in September 1587 with 2 other men and a dog. Their goal was to find a navigable river that would allow them to travel further inland and perhaps even reach the Pacific Ocean. But within a few days, they found something much more interesting. On the banks of a small stream, they discovered a Native American settlement that had apparently been abandoned not long before. The explorers spent some time looking around the village and found several interesting items, including a pair of stone axes, a pipe made from a human skull, and even a Spanish coin that may have been minted as late as 1566. Most intriguing of all, however, was a single word carved into a post. It was the name Archaeological, or Roanoke, which the explorers believed to be the name of the local chieftain. White and his companions tried to track down Roanoke in hopes of trading with him, but they never found the chief or any other natives. And after a few weeks, the explorers returned to the fort to resume their preparations for a new settlement. Now, the exact nature of those preparations is not known, but it seems likely that the colonists were building new houses and gathering supplies for another attempt at growing crops. This was not going to be an easy settlement. As White himself later reported, the colonists had suffered greatly from cold, hunger and sickness during their first 2 winters, and they were eager to put that behind them. But their plans were soon interrupted by the arrival of a supply ship from England, under the command of Sir Francis Drake. The ship brought with it much-needed food and other supplies, as well as a new governor, John Harvey. Unfortunately, Harvey turned out to be a bit of a tyrant, and he quickly alienated many of the settlers by seizing their property and ordering them to move to a new location. Now, this might sound familiar to anyone who studied North American history, because it's basically the same thing that happened at Jamestown a few years later. But in reality, this sort of thing just happens whenever a group of people is forced to live in close quarters while trying to accomplish something difficult, like establishing a new settlement in a strange and hostile environment. Resources are limited, and when those resources are taken away, people become desperate, and desperation often leads to conflict. And so it was at Roanoke. The colonists fought back against Governor Harvey, and the struggle between them grew so heated that the English decided to send a 3rd ship to the colony to restore order. That ship arrived in August 1588, just as relations between the colonists and Governor Harvey were reaching a boiling point. On board the ship was an official representative of the Virginia Company, the English corporation that held a charter to colonize North America. His name was Thomas Harriot, and his job was to investigate the colony and report back to the company about whether or not it should continue to be funded. Harriot spent several weeks at Roanoke before returning to England, and during that time he learned a great deal about the New World. He collected specimens of local plants and animals, and he even helped the colonists improve their farming techniques by introducing new crops such as barley and wheat. But probably the most important thing Harriot did was make a map of the region, which he then included in his report to the Virginia Company. The map was the first accurate depiction of the North American mainland, and it provided the English with valuable information about the possibilities for future colonization. With that, we have essentially reached the end of the story. There is, of course, the famous mystery of what happened to the colony after Harriet left, but the truth is that we don't know much about it either way. The only surviving evidence comes from a single word carved into a post, which simply says Croatoan. If that doesn't tell us anything about what happened to the colonists, it does at least teach us something about the nature of mysteries and the way they capture our imaginations. We want to believe in mysteries because they offer us a glimpse into the unknown. They tantalize us with the possibility that there are things in this world we don't understand, and they challenge us to use our imaginations to try and make sense of them. In that sense, mysteries are like puzzles, and we get a sense of satisfaction when we solve them. But we also enjoy the challenge of trying to solve them, even if we never reach a conclusion. Think of all the true crime podcasts and murder mystery novels that are popular today, or consider the fact that people will spend hours searching for clues on websites like Reddit. We're naturally curious about the unknown, and we're willing to spend a lot of time and effort trying to uncover it. But sometimes the unknown is best left unknown, and that's certainly the case at Roanoke. All the theories about what happened to the colony are interesting to think about, but they're just that, theories. We'll never know what really happened, and that's something we have to accept. Roanoke is a good example of a mystery that has captured the public imagination and inspired all sorts of speculation. But it's also a reminder that not every mystery needs to be solved. Sometimes it's okay to leave the past in the past, and that's a lesson we can all take to heart. So I hope you've enjoyed this little detour into the world of mysteries. I personally love a good mystery, whether it's a book, a movie, or a TV show. I recently finished watching The Sinner on Netflix, and I thought it was great. What about you? What's your favorite mystery story? Let me know in the comments below. I'd also like to say thank you to my patrons for supporting this channel and allowing me to keep making videos about history. I'm especially grateful to my top-tier patrons for their extra support. If you'd like to support the channel and appear in this list too, please check out the links in the description. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's been subscribing to the channel. I'm approaching a milestone and I'd love to reach it before the end of the year. If you're not already subscribed, please consider doing so. It helps the channel grow and keeps me motivated to keep making videos. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Chapter 10, The Landscape Today in 1585. When the first English settlers arrived in what would become known as North Carolina, they landed on an island that had been inhabited for thousands of years by the Croatoan people. There were rolling grassy hills, a broad and gentle harbor, and miles of golden sandy beaches. This was Roanoke Island. It looked much like it looks today. Today, this barrier island is part of the Outer Banks, a string of islands off the coast of North Carolina that are home to wild horses, charming beach towns, and some of the best surfing in the world. And yet there's a quiet serenity here, too. You can walk for a long time on the beach and not see another soul. You can hike through shady forests and only hear the wind in the trees. I visited Roanoke Island and Hatteras recently and spent a day exploring the landscape that the settlers would have known. And while there were plenty of reminders of the thousands of tourists who flock to this area every year, I could also sense the stillness of the place, just as it must have been when the settlers were here. I started my day at the Chickamaucomico Pier, which juts out into the Sound on the west side of Roanoke Island. This is the spot where the settlers in 1585 would have landed, and while the pier wasn't here, of course, back then, the view is pretty much the same. When they came ashore here, the settlers would have seen rolling grassy hills, marshes and thickets, perhaps some wild horses grazing on the beach. The nearest neighbors would have been the Croatoan people, who lived farther inland. The English colony would last only 2 years, and when the survivors of that colony sailed away from Roanoke in 1587, they left behind a landscape that began to reclaim the land that the settlers had cleared and used for planting. By the time the English returned to the island more than a century later, the forests were deep and the settlements were gone. The only evidence of the colony's existence were the few artifacts that turned up in the soil. And so it was with a mixture of wonder and sadness that I walked along the beach on Roanoke, imagining the settlers walking here before me almost 500 years ago. What were they thinking as they gazed out at the horizon for ships that might never come? What did this landscape look like to them? What did it remind them of, if anything? Were they struck by the beauty of the place, as I was? Or were they too busy trying to survive to pay any attention to their surroundings? The beaches on Roanoke Island are among the most beautiful on the East Coast, maybe in the whole country. The sand is incredibly fine, almost powder-like, and it squeaks between your toes as you walk. The water is the clearest I've ever seen it on the Atlantic, thanks to the protective barrier islands that keep the ocean from washing into the Sound. And the waves roll in almost imperceptibly, making for some of the calmest swimming I've ever experienced. It's hard to believe that these tranquil shores were once the site of a bustling English settlement, but all around me were signs of the colony's former presence. At one end of the beach, a marker indicates the location of Fort Raleigh, which the colonists built for defense against the Spanish and the local natives. A little farther on, a bronze plaque is set into the sand dunes at the spot where the colony's governor, John White, stood when he sailed into the harbor in 1590 and found the settlement deserted. From the shore, you can still make out the faint outlines of the houses and other buildings that once stood here. The streets are still there, too, as well as the remains of the colony's well. All these places are marked with signs, but you'd be hard-pressed to find them, unless you knew exactly where to look. It's easy to walk right by these spots every day without even realizing that this is where the first English settlement in North America once stood. The Roanoke Colony lasted only 2 years, but its impact has lasted centuries. After the settlers left, the land reverted to its natural state, a barrier island fringed with beaches and maritime forest, home to a variety of plants and animals. In the 1600s, English settlers would return to the island and begin growing crops such as corn, tobacco, and cotton. But unlike the colonies that would follow, this one would not become a permanent home for the English. The island remained largely unchanged until the early 1900s, when it was developed as a tourist destination. But even then, it was never the same. As the rest of the country developed, the barrier islands off the coast of North Carolina remained wild and undeveloped. They became known as the Outer Banks, and while they're now home to charming beach towns like Manteo and Nag's Head, the vast majority of the land is owned by the state and managed as a national seashore. Today, visitors to the Outer Banks can explore the beaches, forests, and marshes of Cape Hatteras National Seashore, a protected area that includes more than 70 miles of coastline. If you're looking for solitude on the Outer Banks, you won't find it at the beaches near the towns. But if you drive farther down the coast, you can find yourself the only person on miles of beach. The solitude is almost tangible, broken only by the cry of gulls and the roar of the waves. The isolation of the barrier islands has long made them a haven for those seeking refuge from the outside world. In the early 1900s, the islands were popular with artists and writers who came to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. The novelist Harper Lee spent summers on the Outer Banks, and the playwright Tennessee Williams considered the islands his home away from home. I hiked through the maritime forest on Roanoke Island and walked along the beach, feeling the soft sand between my toes and listening to the waves roll in. The sky was a brilliant blue, dotted with fluffy white clouds. The sun was warm on my skin, and the only sounds were the cry of gulls and the roar of the waves. It was the perfect day to be at the beach, but I couldn't help but wonder what it must have been like here in the 1500s. What did the settlers see when they stood on this very spot? Did they see an idyllic paradise or a wild and dangerous land? How did their experience shape the way they saw the New World? As I stood there, I felt a deep connection to the past. I was standing in the same spot where the first English settlers had stood more than 400 years ago. I could feel their presence all around me. I could almost hear them talking. I wondered what they would have thought of the world I live in today, with its towering cities and thundering machines. Would they have been amazed or appalled? The landscape today is much like it was when the settlers arrived. Rolling grassy hills, a broad and gentle harbor, and miles of golden sandy beaches. The forests are a little thicker and the towns are a little bigger, but the overall character of the place is much the same. There are reminders of the settlers everywhere. The town of Manteo is named after the local Native American tribe. The Outer Banks are littered with artifacts from the early colonies, and the stories of the lost colony are kept alive in the annual outdoor drama The Lost Colony, which is performed in the summer months. This play tells the story of the Roanoke Colony, from the arrival of the settlers to the mysterious disappearance of the colony's inhabitants. It's a story that has captivated people for centuries, and I was lucky enough to see a performance during my visit. The play is performed in a natural amphitheater that was built in 1937. The site was chosen because it closely resembles the Elizabethan-era theater where Shakespeare's plays were performed. The theater is open to the elements, so the actors perform under the stars. The audience sits on wooden benches and the costumes and sets are designed to blend in with the natural surroundings. The play is full of action and intrigue, and it's clear that a lot of time, energy, and money goes into producing it every year. The cast is made up of talented actors and actresses, and the play is well written and directed. After the play, I took a walk along the beach under the stars. The night was cool and clear, and the Milky Way stretched across the sky. I felt a deep sense of peace and tranquility, and I could unhelp but wonder what the settlers had seen when they stood on this very spot. Had they looked up at the stars and dreamed of a better life in the new world? Had they feared the darkness and the creatures that might come out in the night? Or had they simply been too busy trying to survive to pay any attention to their surroundings? What I do know is that they would have been in awe of the natural beauty that surrounded them. The Roanoke Colony may have failed, but the natural beauty of the Outer Banks endures. So the next time you're planning a trip to the Outer Banks, take a moment to imagine what it must have been like here when the first English settlers arrived. Stand on the beach and listen to the waves crashing around you. Feel the wind in your hair and the sun on your skin. Close your eyes and picture the settlers standing here before you, gazing out at the horizon for ships that might never come. Imagine what they must have thought as they looked out at the vast expanse of water, knowing that they were on an island with nothing but forest and beach for miles. It's a powerful experience that will connect you to the past in a way you never imagined possible. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time. Hello friends, it's me. Welcome back to the Outer Banks. This summer we have been exploring the story of the Lost Colony, England's first attempt to settle in North America, which began right here on Roanoke Island in 1585. And though the colony failed, its legacy endured through the centuries. The story is one of ambition and courage, mystery and intrigue. There are so many things we would love to know about what happened to the 115 English settlers who disappeared from Roanoke Island in the summer of 1590. Where did they go? Why did they leave? What happened to their settlement? Did they intermingle with Native American tribes? Or were they, as some believe, victims of some kind of terrible disease? The answers remain elusive after all these years. But maybe that's not the most important thing to take away from the story of the Lost Colony. Before we say goodbye for this season, I want us to think about what the story of the Lost Colony means to us today, how it continues to live in our world, and why its mystery has captured the imagination of so many people over the centuries. Let's start by circling back to where we began our journey together, with Virginia Dare, the first child of English parents born in the New World. She was born on August 18, 1587. At the height of the Lost Colony's struggle to survive. When the supply ship arrived the following June, it found the fort deserted and the colony seemingly abandoned. But there was one sign of life, the word Croatoan carved into a post and the letters Crow carved into a tree. These cryptic clues have only deepened the mystery of what really happened to the Lost Colony. They are indecipherable without context, and that context is gone forever. But what if we take a step back and look at them in a different way? The word Croatoan could be a clue to an answer, but it can also represent a question. It's a reminder that there is something we don't know, something lost to history. This idea is reflected in the name of our national park, which includes not just the words Roanoke and Island, but also Lost Colony. That phrase is part of the name not because we know the answer, but because we don't. The missing piece of the puzzle has become a symbol of the enduring power of mystery. The Lost Colony is a story of resilience in the face of great challenges. From the relentless assaults of the elements to attacks from Native Americans, the colonists showed incredible tenacity as they struggled to build a life in a completely new and often hostile environment. Their story reminds us that even when faced with the most daunting odds, the human spirit can endure. The fact that they attempted this settlement at all, that they ventured into the unknown with such bravery, is a testament to the indomitable spirit of exploration that has always driven humanity forward. And speaking of that spirit, I know that many of you watching have embarked on your own adventures. Whether it's traveling to the Outer Banks or reading about the Lost Colony, you have shown a similar courage to the early English settlers, a willingness to explore the unknown and to face whatever challenges come your way. Thank you for accompanying us on this journey. The story of the Lost Colony is one of exploration and adventure. It takes us back to a time when the world was full of unknown possibilities, when brave explorers set sail for distant shores in search of new lands and new opportunities. The very idea of a group of English settlers choosing to leave their familiar homeland and venture into the vast unknown of the New World is a thrilling adventure in itself. This story captures the spirit of discovery that has always been a driving force in human history. It reminds us of the courage and determination of those who dared to explore the uncharted waters of the world. As we conclude our journey through the mystery of the Lost Colony, I encourage you to think about the ways in which their story continues to live on in our world today. The story is more than just a tale of long ago. It's a part of our collective memory, a shared heritage that binds us to those who came before us. But the story of the lost colony isn't just about the past. It's also about the present and the future. The mystery surrounding the colony continues to captivate people all around the world, and that fascination has led to countless books, TV shows, movies, and even video games. The story has inspired countless works of art, each adding its own unique interpretation to the mystery. This enduring interest in the lost colony is a testament to the power of storytelling and the human fascination with the unknown. So what is the legacy of the lost colony? What does it mean to us today? Well, it's a story of courage, of resilience, of exploration, of adventure. It's a story that reminds us that even in the face of the greatest challenges, the human spirit can endure. It's a story that captures our imagination and makes us wonder what might have been. It's a story that continues to live on in our world today through the countless works of art it has inspired. But perhaps most importantly, the story of the lost colony is a reminder of the power of memory. The settlers may have vanished from Roanoke Island, but their story has lived on through the centuries, carried by the winds of time. And now you have added your own voice to that chorus, sharing in the mystery and intrigue of this timeless tale. You have traveled back in time and walked the very same ground where the lost colony once stood. You have explored the island where history was made and where a nation's fate hung in the balance. You have stood on the edge of the Atlantic and felt the same wind that once carried the hopes and dreams of the English settlers. And you have gazed up at the stars and wondered if the same constellations guided the lost colony as they sailed across the vast ocean to this distant shore. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope that you have enjoyed learning about the lost colony, and that you will carry the memory of the brave settlers who came before us deep in your hearts. As we say goodbye for this season, we invite you to continue the adventure at home. Read books, watch documentaries, and share stories about the lost colony with your friends and family. And who knows, maybe one day you will find yourself drawn back to Roanoke Island to experience the magic of the lost colony for yourself. It's me. Thanks for watching. Have a safe journey home. And remember, the spirit of the lost colony lives on in all of us who dare to dream of adventure and who are never afraid to follow our hearts, no matter how daunting the odds may seem. By now, we made it to the end of another season. Can you believe it? Time sure does fly when you're having fun. But don't worry, we will be back next year with all new adventures, so be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss an exciting episode. Until then, you can catch up on all our previous episodes right here. Thanks for watching. Bye. A soft image of waves erasing footprints on a moonlit beach, mystery blending with time.